When you're getting into a new game, learning old and new systems can be a bit daunting, especially when we're talking about a game that's had 8 years worth of development and is still being developed. One of the hardest things about jumping into one of those games, or even considering jumping into one of those games, even if you have friends playing or maybe guild mates moving over to that game, is the idea that you're going to have to do all of that content, and by the time you do it, are you even going to make it to the end game, or is that just going to be another bar that's moved even further down the road? Let's talk about that, and let's get into these kind of concepts, and should you play Final Fantasy XIV now in the year 2021? Hey everybody, I'm Lord Glarp, content creator and streamer over at twitch.tv/Lord Glarp. And today I'm going to guide you through what I believe is the most important bits to get to know about Final Fantasy XIV before, during, and after becoming a Sprout. Real quick, I want to address anybody who's been thinking about playing Final Fantasy XIV but hasn't really ripped that band-aid off. They're not sure if they're actually going to do it. They've been thinking about it and they just need to know, what does the game do poorly and what does the game do really well? And there are so many different things that the game does poorly, and there's so many things that it does well. I'm going to point out what I believe to be the three main pros and the three main cons of the game. And I want you all to know that I love Final Fantasy. I love Final Fantasy XIV. I'm going to play it until they're sick of making any more content for the game. However, the game is designed in such a way that I really, really enjoy it. I do not believe that any one game should be made for all types of people and all types of players. No game is. If you're really into raiding, if you think raiding and end game content is amazing and you want difficult, big bosses, and you want your participation in those battles to matter, this is going to be just a free pro because this isn't in my list of pros, but you're going to love this game because the boss fights in this game, especially the big end game ones, they're amazing. They're incredible. And because the group sizes are so small, your participation in those fights matters way more than it does in a lot of games that do sort of the same thing. So something the game does really poorly, in my opinion, is PvP related content. The PvP content doesn't get nearly as much support as the rest of the game. There are rewards, and sometimes those rewards are badass, but those rewards typically go to a very small group of people per server. And I don't really understand why they do this, and they don't just make a benchmark for a player to meet. But it can be kind of a daunting idea that you need to be in the top 100 players on your server in order to get this thing. Though, because PvP is not super popular in general in Final Fantasy XIV, getting to that top 100 is probably a lot easier in this game than in other games. The engine is old. The engine for this game is 8 years old, and we've seen what happens to other MMORPGs and other games in general that are trying to hold up, and they're trying to come out with new content and do new things, but their engine simply won't allow them to do that. You can kind of feel that Final Fantasy XIV, the developers basically are trying to stretch the engine to do as many things as it can. So really what they do is they just emphasize on the things that it already does very well, and they add bits more of what's already working. So you don't get as much variety, and you don't really get anything that feels very, very new. What you do get, however, is landscapes that look very open and barren at times, especially in the beginning content and the Realm Reborn content. You see this a lot more, but throughout the whole game, you do get some areas, some scenes that are, they feel very just open and barren and empty. And that can be a big turnoff for a lot of people. One of the things I think the game does poorly, but it's not something that a developer can have any control over because it is part of the game, and really it is a huge con for a lot of people, and it's the biggest pro for a lot of people. So I'm putting this kind of smack dab in the middle, and you can kind of determine if you think this is a pro or a con for yourself. But many players abandon the game simply because they don't feel like they can keep up with the content, or they're there so early. And no other MMO that I'm aware of requires you to play through all of the content to get to the end game. like with World of Warcraft, you can make a character, you can skip 90% of the content, and you will still level up at a a good rate. You'll still level up at a particular speed. You will get there. And you're not going to have to go back and fight every raid. You're not going to have to go back and fight every boss and do all these side quests that were barriers for entry in their time. In Final Fantasy XIV, everything that was a barrier of entry is still a barrier of entry. Every quest that had to be completed then has to be completed now. And for a lot of people, the prospect of doing 2,000 plus quests and killing every boss in the game, doing every raid, is not something they want to do. They don't want to do that old stuff. They want to do the new stuff. Now, I want to give a shout out to someone like Asmongold, who I know does not like story content historically and really is an end game gamer. And when I say end game, I mean the real end game, the true end game. We're talking glamours, cosmetics, mounts, all that stuff, the real end game. Something the game does really well, and you're going to hear this a million times over if you haven't heard it already: community, community, community. Something that Final Fantasy XIV does that I think shocks and amazes a lot of people is when you step in and you've been in the game for a little bit of time, you get drawn back to this place of nostalgia, this place when communities mattered, when guilds thrived, when people communicated with each other and hung out in game just because. You really get a wash over your body. Almost feels like a cleansing that, yes, MMOs are still about community. And it's amazing. People just gather from all over the place to do really weird shit, on top of actually playing the game and all of your raiding and what have you. They show up to each other's houses for role play, for like these nightclub looking events. And FC is a lot of FCs. They're free companies. It's like guilds. They do their own events. I know the free company that I've been in for basically since I started playing the game. They do like 12 to 20 different events per month. And all of those events are just hosted by the free company. And we all just show up and we hang out, we play games, we get prizes, and it's fantastic. It's something that I haven't felt in a video game maybe ever. I mean, really, I miss community in MMOs in a lot of ways, but Final Fantasy not only do they take it back to where community used to be in games, it takes it back and then it takes it 10 steps further to where it's just undeniably the most community driven MMO that's been made to date. In my opinion, I believe that would stand up to anyone else's scrutiny. Some of the best music there has ever been in a video game, full stop, is in Final Fantasy XIV. We're talking real life bands, fully orchestrated numbers. And when I say fully orchestrated, I don't mean just the title screen is orchestrated. I mean a specific portion of a specific fight, of a specific boss, not only for that boss's fight, but for a particular amount of time when the tension is high in that fight, you'll get a bit of music that is synced up to the fight. I don't know who came up with this idea. Like, whoever came up with it, they deserve all of the raises there have ever been. Because you can take a stupid looking fight and a stupid looking boss and you put some badass music behind it, and somehow it just becomes great. It becomes amazing and fun. The last thing I'm going to say that Final Fantasy does really well is just basic system design. And that might not sound like a big deal, but really in today's market of games where they're just trying to like burn and turn, they're trying to give you this new fancy thing to get in game that they can get rid of a year later. It feels like Final Fantasy XIV puts things in the game just for you. You feel like it's just there to make the game just better. It didn't have to be there. They could have monetized it. They, like when it comes to glamour, you can paint a lot of your gear, you can dye a lot of your gear. There's no functional reason to be able to do that. Plus, you're changing the color of a piece of armor, so you're kind of redesigning portions of it in a way. I mean, in games like World of Warcraft, obviously they would never let you color anything because, you can multiply the value of content by releasing the red version and the blue version and the yellow version of the same piece of content. I like that Final Fantasy doesn't do that. They're like, here's the thing, take it, color it, change it, swap it out, do whatever you want with it, make it yours. And I know I'm probably getting a little off track here, but when I say great system design, I'm also talking about the dungeons are pretty cool. The lore is insane. The storytelling is incredible. The camera angles, the raids, the tension building, the music. It feels like everything is just very intentionally pieced together and very carefully pieced together. No part of the game feels haphazardly designed or just done on a whim or on a fly. And I really appreciate that about the game. And I feel like anyone who plays the game for any amount of time will get, I don't want to say addicted to the game, but I think will be drawn into the game because there's an inherent understanding when something is aesthetically pleasing or when something exists for no other reason but to entertain you and to bring value to your time. And I mean, really, to me, Final Fantasy XIV, the thing it does the best for me and the thing that I care about the most when it comes to a game in general is respecting my time. Does this game respect my time? And Final Fantasy XIV respects my time more than any other game I've played in recent history. If you're already playing Final Fantasy XIV or you're just now getting into it, welcome. I hope you're having a great time. Super happy to have you as part of this insanely rapidly growing and expanding community. Even 8 years later, it's still growing like crazy. If you haven't taken those first steps yet, I highly recommend the free trial. Final Fantasy XIV has a free trial. That free trial takes you through A Realm Reborn and Heavensward, which for a lot of people is 300 plus hours of content. So if you want to take a 300-hour taste of the game, you can do that without paying anything. The process of gaining access to the free trial and making your own account and really doing anything involving Square Enix Online is a confusing disaster. I don't know why this is, but everything about their online presence is insanely unpolished and very confusing. So we'll drop a link in the description at the bottom of this video to hopefully get you to the places that you need to be to get started. But really sacrificing some kind of creature to the god of the internet will probably be more sufficient. Again, with the free trial, you can play up to level 60 in every single job. Gives you all of the content of A Realm Reborn and the Heavensward expansion. There's also a surprisingly large community of free-to-play only players that basically have built a entire community around just A Realm Reborn and Heavensward, and they don't play anything else. And there really is enough content there that you could probably experience those bits of content over and over again indefinitely. The only drawbacks there are is you can't use a market board, which is a lot like an auction house, and you also can't join a free company, which is a lot like a guild or a community hub. Those are the only two things that you can't really participate in that I think are very important, but they're not game breaking, especially since the beginning of the game feels like a single player game anyway. Not having access to these things is not going to make or break your experience at all. One quick big warning: if you spend even a penny on your account buying anything, you void your free trial. The moment you attach a form of payment, a method of payment, and you pay for anything, your free trial is over and it's done. Once you start playing the game, even if you're not playing into an expansion beyond Heavensward, even if you haven't done any content beyond Heavensward, if your account time runs out, you cannot ever go back to the free trial. Something to just know right away. And if you're trying to make a decision about, should I do this? Maybe I should get a month and then go back to the free trial. You can't do it. You pay 1 penny, your account is never be back on free trial ever again. Now that you've sacrificed a portion of your soul and at least 3 hours of your time to the account creation gods, it's time to pick up your data center. You're going to be asked to pick a data center, and then after picking a data center, you're going to be asked to pick a server. It's very, very important if you're going to play with friends to know what data center they're on. You can still play with people who you know IRL if you're in the same data center but not on the same server, but I highly recommend to try to get on the same server because that's going to affect what FC you can be in and basically the ease of playing with other people. It's also probably not super important to know, but if you have the time to do the research, figuring out what data centers and what servers big time streamers are on is probably maybe beneficial, as when they come online or they do big events, the queue to get into the game can go over a couple thousand. Real quick, you're going to hear something called level boosting or level skips or story skips, some kind of variation of that terminology. Basically, what it is on the Square Enix Moogle store, you can purchase a skip for a portion of story. When you skip that portion of story, you're skipping just the story bit. And it's important to understand that with the way that things unlock in Final Fantasy XIV, they don't always unlock in a straightforward path. And this is going to maybe sound way too confusing, but just know that there is certain content that even if you do your story skip, you're going to have to go back and do some of the content, even though you skipped the main story. That content that you're going to have to do is going to be hard to chain together because it's meant to be done with the main story. Certain things like beating certain bosses, doing certain raids that unlock different raids and different bosses later on down the line, you're eventually going to want to go back and redo those things. So just understand that when you do a skip, you're paying money to not play the game. From what I can tell, from my limited experience of speaking with people who have done these skips, the few people that I have talked to about this, they have regretted it and they want to do a new game plus or make a new character anyway, so that way they can go back and experience the story. The story is completely worth doing, even if you're someone who is historically not into big RPG stories. It's totally worth it. I promise you it's worth it. Now that you're in, you've made an account, you've picked your server. What class are you going to play? What job are you going to do? What race are you going to be? Where do you want to start your game out? What's the difference between a class and a job? We'll get to that in just a second. First, I want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video and getting this far in the video. If it is offering you any kind of help or entertainment, please hit the thumbs up. It helps me immensely. It helps feed the monster that is the YouTube algorithm. And if you hit the subscribe button, it takes 2 seconds. It helps out my life in really an incredible way, more than you could imagine. Make sure also to check the description below after the video for timestamps, more resources, and links to more of my content if that's what you're into. Probably my personal favorite system in Final Fantasy XIV is the class system and job system. Every player can play as any class or job in the game. This means that you don't have to make a dozen new characters or replay any content to try out a new job. This means that the character that you make in the beginning is probably going to be your forever character. Now, there's ways to change your race later. There's ways to make yourself look different later. So don't get too hung up on the way your character looks right now. Myself, I started out as one race, and I think I switched races like 3 times before I figured out what I liked. A class is basically just a job that hasn't turned into a job yet, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but we'll get there, right? If you think in the terms of a job is what everyone is playing after level 15, then you're good. All right. So you do have to play a new class if you want to play a new job, but you play that class for a very limited amount of time, and then that upgrades or evolves into the job that you want to play. The goal here is to help you make the best informed decision when picking the job that you'll start with, and likely play for quite some time in the beginning. Keep in mind that the way I describe each job may feel slightly disconnected from your own experience at first until you start gaining levels and unlocking more actions, abilities, spells, that sort of thing. This is in no way a complete guide to jobs or the job systems or these jobs individually. We're skimming the surface here, again, just to make a slightly informed decision. First, we'll talk about the tanks in the game. These jobs are responsible for taking the brunt of damage in group battles. They don't pump out much damage, but they can take a serious beating. All tanks wear heavy armor and use a gauntlet of defensive cooldown abilities. In group fights, the tank is responsible for positioning enemies and facing them away from the party and holding their attention once they have it. These are the three pillar responsibilities of being a tank. If you play a tank, you'll have access to a defensive stance. This is the core and key to playing the role well with other players. Your options for tank in the beginning will be limited to the gladiator, who will turn into the paladin. The pros and cons of a paladin are great party-wide damage mitigation. They're also one of the best co-tanks when you're tanking along with another tank in a group fight. You can use a shield that basically just passively blocks damage, and you have a really good single target emergency heal. The cons of playing a gladiator are they have weak aggro generation when initiating fights, and they're a bit slow and clunky feeling compared to most other tanks. Second up is the Marauder, who then turns into the Warrior later on. The pros of the Marauder is they do have a really high damage output for a tank, even now that more tanks have been introduced to the game. They can switch between stances pretty fluidly. A lot of other tanks, it feels a lot more clunky to switch between stances. It feels very natural for the Warrior. And they can quickly pull and generate threat. They are a fantastic initiator of combat. The downside of playing Marauder is they don't really have any support abilities, and they don't have nearly as much damage mitigation as a lot of other tanks. So you could say they're a very aggressive tank. Second, we have melee DPS. These jobs get right into the thick of the action and go toe-to-toe with their opponents. You'll have the Monk, who does high average DPS. They have a physical damage party buff, which is fantastic, and they have bonus healing with their mantras. Cons, they have no ranged attacks, not really much utility for a DPS, and they're super busy in both fights and during downtime. There's just a lot to learn with the Monk. Next, we have the Lancer, which their pros are things that might not matter to you now, but they'll make sense later if you do decide to play a Lancer. It's the only job that can apply a piercing resistance down debuff for other jobs that do piercing damage. It's kind of interesting to be the only character in a game that can apply a very specific and powerful debuff that really helps out other DPS. They can massively boost party critical hit rate and damage output with different abilities. The Lancer and the Dragoon are really more supportive than I ever would have given them credit for. They're very helpful in a group fight. Their cons, they have a crazy long rotation and one of the most complicated rotations in the game. I've not done this rotation myself, but I've heard it's like 21 button combo or something crazy like that. Though the jumps that they learn are pretty cool, some have animation locks that can make movement difficult to adjust to in the moment. And personally, I hate animation lock mechanics. I don't like feeling like I don't have in control of my character, so that's a big con for me. Moving on to the healers in the game, which is pretty self-explanatory, but in Final Fantasy XIV, I've come to find that healing is really interesting. It's interesting how they've branched and diversified the healers in the game. First, we have the Arcanist, who turns into the Scholar later on. Their pros are they share a level up with a Summoner, which is a magic DPS. It's kind of cool. It's the only really it's the only job in the game that has a dual job for a single class at this point in time. I'm sure some will come in the future, but this whole job and class system thing seems like it's solely because of the Arcanist, because it's the only, like I said, it's the only class that has two jobs. They have fantastic mana management, good movement, and a lot of offensive party support. So they're good for a healer. Pretty awesome. Their only cons are they have global cooldown heals that can feel pretty inefficient, and their pet mechanics management can feel kind of clunky, kind of odd. The Conjurer turns into the White Mage later on. Pros of that, they are very mana efficient, especially for a healer in most games. They can cast AoE stun and deal pretty high damage for a healer. Super beginner friendly healing job with straightforward mechanics. I mean, really, the White Mage is the quintessential healer of the Final Fantasy series. Their cons are they have no party wide shield abilities, and they're very heal focused, not shield focused, which is something you'll learn playing Final Fantasy XIV, that there's there's heals and there's shields, and they really take a very interesting stance on how these two concepts work and how they work with each other, what needs to be shielded, what needs to be healded. I'm leaving that in. They don't have many healing abilities that are instant cast. Movement kind of becomes a hassle because they're kind of always casting these longer abilities, and they have no party damage utility at all. For ranged physical DPS, we have the Archer, who turns into a Bard, which I thought was super weird when I first started playing. Like, why does the Archer turn into a Bard? Just kind of odd. But the pros are they have a ton of freedom of movement. They have lots of offensive utility. They have lots of defensive utility. They're very, very utility heavy. They have basically a button for any situation you can find yourself in. I felt that playing a bard made me feel very useful. There was never a moment where I didn't feel like I was doing something to help the team in some way, and I like that feeling. The weird con about the bard, especially in like raids and dungeons and parties, is they're very strangely reliant on another dragoon being in the party because of the piercing buff, um, which plays a critical role in the bard's like personal damage output. It's very strange in group fights. Like if you join a raid and there's not a dragoon in it, like you feel like you're going to be less useful than you could be. It's just a strange thing. Along with having lots of abilities, a lot of those abilities are situational and need to be micromanaged. So even though you do feel useful all the time, the other half of the time you're wondering why you didn't push that button that you should have because there's too many things going on. Lastly, we have Magic DPS, the squishiest of the Nuki boys, as I like to call them. No one else calls them that, it's just me. Firstly, we have the Arcanist, who we've already talked about, but now we're going to be talking about them as their summoner counterpart. They're a highly mobile caster. I mean, they're very, very, very mobile for a caster, even by modern standards. They have a good single target and great sustained AoE damage, and they can also revive a downed party member, which is pretty awesome. It's something they have in their arsenal that's pretty fantastic. Death is insanely punishing for a summoner. Basically, they're building up all of these layers of resources on top of each other, and then they die and they lose all of these stacks, all these resources. They got to resummon their pet. Death is very punishing for the summoner. Just something to note. Lastly, we have the Thaumaturge, or the Black Mage, which is arguably the best job in the game, I would say. I think it's the best. They have insanely high potential DPS output. Their death is not punishing at all. Like when I die, I get rezzed, I get up, I just start blowing things up again. Black mages have the highest potential DPS in the game. I believe that's still true. We don't care about death. When we die in battle, we get right back up and we just start nuking again. We have absolutely nothing that we have to maintain. All we maintain is blowing people's fucking heads up. That's it. That's the only thing you got to maintain as a black mage. You have insanely good AoE damage. You just have great damage. I mean, the black mage is just a nuclear cannon. Which brings me to the cons. The cons are it's a very selfish job. It's got no utilities, no revives, no buffs, no debuffs. The black mage is just there to kick ass and take names. That's it. It's not there to help anyone, not even their own party members. They have a longer than average cast time, and they have kind of a turret style gameplay. You cast a spell called Ley Lines that you have to stand in to increase your damage output by a ton, which usually pulls you into a mental place of like, you're like, can I take this damage? Maybe I could just take this damage. Maybe I don't got to move. Maybe I can just skip this mechanic. Maybe I won't die because I want to get one more spell off. Just one more spell. Because your damage output completely plummets during heavy mechanic fights. If you got to move, your damage is going in the drain. And it makes the character very interesting to play because you almost feel like you're playing a job that's from a different video game altogether, and you fell into this world by accident because your personal mechanics work in such contrast with the game's mechanics. It's interesting. I could talk about Black Mage all day because I fucking love playing Black Mage. So that's it for all of the combat jobs. I hope that gives you a little bit of clarity and maybe an understanding of what you'd want to play starting off. There's also 8 crafting jobs and 3 gathering jobs that you can learn. They're all fantastic. I know there's lots of players who have never touched them before or just simply don't like the way that crafting works in Final Fantasy XIV. I absolutely love it. It makes it feel like they're actual jobs. It doesn't feel like just this little tacky thing that's been applied to your character. It's not like a little profession menu with like a couple little things. You can make good shit and you can make good money. And it is good fun, especially the gathering classes. The gathering classes are superior, in my opinion. Before we wrap up this introductory guide, I want to shoot some tips at you. I've written them all down, so I'm going to be reading off the screen here. I want to make sure that I get these in their entirety. After a few hundred hours of gameplay, I learned some of these. So this is definitely stuff that I would like to know at the beginning of the game. In your settings, you can link inventory windows together. This makes it so you never have to click between inventory tabs again. You can branch this out into 2 buttons that are 2 tabs apiece, or you can do 1 button that's all 4 tabs. It's pretty cool. I love it. Wish I knew about it like 2,000 hours ago. Retainers are an important part of the late game, and they take a long time to build up and level up. They're worth figuring out, and I'll make a retainer specific guide in the future, and then I'll put it in the description below once that video is ready. But retainers are good. Retainers are important. Don't sleep on retainers. I know a lot of people who basically just never use them, and they make your life a little better. They make a lot of maintenance a lot better for your character. If you left click on the image of Gil in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, it'll open up your currency tab. I knew this forever, and I used it. And one day I accidentally right-clicked it, and it displayed a different currency. So there you go. If you're at the gold saucer and you want to keep track of how many tokens you're getting there, you can just right-click on your currency, and it will be out in the open for you to see. It's amazing. If combat is blinding you, hit escape, go to character configuration, character, and then select show limited in the party section of battle effects settings. This will tone down all of the chaos to a manageable level, especially while you're trying to learn your character, especially if you're doing this path to 70 thing they got going on right now where you're leveling up very fast. You might be out leveling your job experience, and all of this extra blinding light can, especially if you're playing a melee class, can really work against you. So I highly recommend toggling this setting off, and then when you learn your job, toggling it back on. Less distractions. It's good. All major cities are good, and no race is inherently better than any other. Your decision of race should be one of a personal preference. It's not like a lot of other games where certain races get certain bonuses or micro bonuses or anything like that. Don't worry about it. It's purely aesthetic. It's purely just for you. So don't worry about it. Just go with what you think looks good. Something that took me like a very strange amount of time to figure out when I was playing, I think I was like level 20 before I figured it out, but in the upper left corner of your screen, you're going to see your main story quest. When people are discussing anything that has to do with the main story quest, they call it the MSQ. So if someone says, "Where are you at on your MSQ?" in the top left-hand corner, you will see the name of the mission you're on, and that is your MSQ. No other quest you're on, no other thing you're doing in the game will show up in the top left-hand corner in that big chunky lettering bar. That's just your MSQ. If you have a job related quest, a quest that is related specifically to the job that you currently have equipped, you can see the name of that job quest directly underneath your MSQ quest. So in the top left-hand corner, you will see in big letters what the next quest you need to do is for the main story quest or MSQ. And directly underneath that will be any quest that you need to accomplish specifically for the job that you're on. It's so clear and it's so simple, yet I don't know why it took me so long to figure it out. Attune to every single aether crystal you find. And if there is an aether crystal that is out of your way and you don't really have any reason to go to it or go over there anyway and attune to it. Get used to attuning to everything as often as you can, as frequently as you can. The story will bring you back to areas you were in before. And when you get really far into the story, your ability to fly in certain areas is dependent on how many of these crystals you are attuned to. So attune to them, all of them, every one of them, all the time. Blue quest markers containing a plus symbol represent side quests that will give or unlock something. It is highly recommended that you do every single one you can find. It's insane how much incredible content is locked behind these quests. These quests are not required in order for you to progress in the story. Remember, blue quest markers containing a plus symbol. Do them. The other ones, the ones that are just like gold with an exclamation point, ignore them. Pass by them. They don't matter. I mean, you can do them, but you don't need to do them, and they won't give you anything other than experience and some gil. You can get a chocobo mount for free at level 30, and it's part of the MSQ. It's part of the main story quest. You also gain flying eventually through the MSQ or the main story quest. Stop asking every single FC member, streamer, and random passerby, when am I going to get a mount? When am I going to get it flying? Where do I get my first mount at? What level am I going to be? Play the game, and you'll automatically get it. That's it. Just play the game, do the MSQ, and it will happen. It cannot be avoided. Getting a mount, getting flying cannot be avoided. It's not something you have to seek out. It will happen. While you're working your way to max level, basically just ignore the stats on all of your gear. If you can wear it, wear it. And if it has a higher item level, equip it. Item level is basically the only thing you want to give a crap about while you're leveling up. So when we were talking about classes at the beginning, note that every single class has its own hunting log. You can see that in logs in the bottom right-hand corner. And when you're playing the game, it's somewhere around here, typically. You can do these hunting logs to earn early XP. They're really good. They're really good. It's a good amount of XP. A lot of the log stuff is really good. So make sure that you're constantly, as you're leveling up and as you're going through the game, check your logs somewhere down here. The default UI and keybinds leaves really a lot to be desired when you start off in terms of convenience and accessibility. So customize early and customize often. There's a lot of UI features that are hidden out of plain sight. Just hit escape, find your UI setup, find your options, get very familiar with the options because your layout will evolve over time and your play style will be realized in your UI. And I've seen a lot of people who have played the game for a long period of time, but really didn't want to mess with their UI because they got too used to it. I'm telling you, customize it early, customize it often. You'll thank me. Tanks and healers will have a shorter queue time typically for most things that involve parties. It kind of sucks, but it's the nature of the beast. I play a black mage, and sometimes for certain content, I'm waiting 15, 20 minutes to find a group. When I was leveling up my white mage for the same exact content, I was waiting 2, 3, 5 minutes. It's just the nature of the beast. Know that if you play a DPS, you are going to have to wait. And that just is what it is. So that's just about everything. I think that's just about everything that I wanted to say about the game. I know that getting into a new game filled with as much content as Final Fantasy XIV and as much refined content as Final Fantasy XIV can really feel daunting, especially when you get in the game. If you're watching this and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, and you get in and you just kind of get this overwhelming feeling because there's so much stuff, just take it at ease. Do the MSQ, do the quests, do your job quests, get into the game, find a good FC free company to join, and take it easy, because things are displayed to you in kind of an order, basically in the order that they were released originally. So don't worry about missing out on something or that you are doing anything wrong. As you play, you will get there. Things will unlock and be explained, and you'll get into the flow. Fighting against the current in this game in the beginning is not going to serve you well. So just go with the current, go with the flow, go with the story, and you're going to have a great time. If you have any questions about the game, or there's a part of the game that you think that there's inefficient guides for, let me know with a detailed comment. I will respond to every single comment on every one of these videos, and I will try to get a video out. Like, why not? It might not be an amazing video, it might not be super edited, but if you've got a genuinely good question and you think there's not good info out there, I will answer the question. I will make a video and I'll tag you in it. If you want to hang out with me outside of these YouTube videos, again, you can find me at twitch.tv/Lord Glarp. I'm usually playing a Final Fantasy game or some manner of RPG, and I absolutely love chatting with new people and meeting new people in the space with similar interests and ideas as I. So pop in and say hi to me anytime. Would love to see you there. Until then, we'll see you in the next one. Have a great one.